I'm sorry. Hello, everyone, and thank you for participating in this webinar, which is part of the Web of the Street Week. This digital forum is organized in replacement of the event Words from the Street, third International Forum of Social Street Workers, which has been postponed to 18th, 22nd October 2021 because of the health measures related to the COVID-19 situation. In order not to lose the momentum, we decided to organize a virtual event which takes place over a week full of exchanges, testimonies, and reflections, with a particular focus on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on a socioeconomic level. Some events are reserved for Dynamo International Street Workers Network members, notably on Monday and Tuesday with the pilot group meeting, a kind of general assembly of the network. Others are open to everyone. These include today's virtual conferences and the press conference on Friday, the 30th. Today, October 28th, we're organizing 4 international webinars in French, English, and Spanish on specific themes related to the impact of the coronavirus crisis at the social level. Violence from the authorities, children in street situations, domestic violence, poverty, access to housing, and other realities. The press conference on October the 30th, broadcast live, will be an opportunity to address to national and international bodies a series of policy recommendations collected and developed throughout the week of Web of the Street. You can find all the documentation regarding the webinar on the link that you can see now on the chat. And also on the first slide, you now can see and have some technical instructions for the webinar. So I'm Francesco, and Graeme's, the floor is yours. Have a good...
Thank you, Francesco.
Welcome.
Welcome to you all from all over the world. Francesco is assisted this morning by colleagues in Dynamo International. So if you have any technical issues, please write something in the chat and we will try to assist you. My job now is to give you some idea of how we will work for the next 1.5 hours. I will begin with a short presentation about the concept of violence and some examples from our experience around the world. And then we have 4 speakers from 4 different countries who will introduce themselves, their organizations, and give you some idea about the work they've been doing. We will take each of these speakers in turn. I will introduce them at the beginning and then they will speak for a few minutes. After this, I will ask the speakers some questions and I will ask them to respond to those questions from the context in which they work. And at this time, you will have an opportunity also to ask questions and to make comments about those questions. So again, please use the chat function and my colleagues at Dynamo will be able to articulate your questions for us to discuss. Okay, I'm conscious that there are probably only 1 or 2 people who speak English as first language. So I value your contributions and the work you've done to speak in in English as another language. So it's important that we all try to help each other to communicate. So please speak slowly, please speak carefully, and we can all try to understand each other. Okay, I'm going to begin with a short presentation for a few minutes, and I have a few images about the subject of violence. Now, when we ask people usually about the concept of violence, usually they talk about physical things. They talk about an interpersonal phenomenon. What this means is the interaction between people, and it's the cause of a deliberate act to attempt to hurt somebody or to cause harm. Okay, and in law, violence is also understood in this way. It is constructed as something that is committed between usually two people. And we can say also that violence can be understood as the effect of collectives, for example, institutions. So in our exploration of violence, we need to think about power and power relationships, and especially those that affect the living conditions of the people that we work with. So it's important that we recognize that violence is more remote than physical interaction. And I think about the work of Johan Galtung, who uses the concept of structural violence. And he says the harms that are created through preventing people meeting their basic needs are forms of violence. So when people's basic needs are not met, we can say that there is violence in the system. And this results from inequalities that are rooted in institutional practices. So now we are starting to explore the causes and the background to this violence. Galtung says that violence is systemic. It's often silent. It's often routine and as natural as the air around us. It's important to think that it's not just interpersonal, it is more impersonal. So we get this wider understanding of violence, which is why we can consider racism and sexism and class prejudice and poverty and colonialism as forms of violence. So we can see also in this story another story, and this is the story of history. History produces this violence because of the structures of power that it creates, and it is imposed on its victims from a distance. This is where we need to remember it's not just the reaction between two individuals. So when we're thinking about the protagonists and the perpetrators of violence, they can be at a distance, they can be at far, they can be in our history also. These are difficult ideas. So the risk is that we see violence in these forms as too abstract, too conceptual. And we sometimes as workers, we resist this because they're difficult ideas to think about. But when we analyze and think about our work, we can recognize that violence does work like this. And it has the effect of very real material processes. They are concrete, the effects of these forms of violence. So we need to consider the results and the effects of these institutional policies and practices. Economic effects that cause physical, economic and psychological harm. We can think about destitution, homelessness, repossession, deportation of migrants, even those who are going hungry as forms of violence. And of course, we can then try to draw attention to these kinds of issues. And we know from our experience, especially recently, that these concrete effects, they are only too visible. They are tangible. We witness, we experience, we observe anxiety and stress. Some of these things, they can be shown in numbers, the numbers of suicides, the numbers of deaths, the numbers of mental health problems. These are very real things. So we can talk about causes, and we can talk about the protagonists, the people who cause violence from afar, politicians, civil servants, private companies, and the sense that through these policies, particular groups and populations, they are targeted, and this is also a form of violence that can then catalyze violence within communities. So I've got a few examples and then we can move to our speakers. Let me move this on. Excuse me for a moment. Okay, I'm conscious we've got colleagues from Hong Kong, and I've been following all the countries that you come from, and we've seen in recent times protest being outlawed, yeah, and the reason given by government is coronavirus regulations. So we can speculate now that the authorities are using coronavirus health legislation to prevent protest, to prevent democratic activity. And also in Hong Kong, we know that the elections have been put back by a year. So there is a very real concern for democracy and the use of coronavirus regulation to prevent campaigning. In Israel, we have similar issues. There is a ban on political meetings, and we can say that they are criminalizing the campaigning activities of activists. And again, they use the idea of the pandemic as a reason for preventing these demonstrations. We can go also, this is from the newspaper Private Eye, to what's happening in Sri Lanka. COVID has proved a perfect cover. Police have announced that anyone criticizing the government, they have arrested 66,000 people in recent times, and they've used the COVID restrictions as a reason for these arrests. We can see also in Sri Lanka that contact tracing is run by the intelligence agencies, not the health services. And this allows a form of surveillance of people's political and religious activities. There has been the denial of burial rights for the Muslim community, the persecution of minorities through COVID regulations. In Britain, we see that COVID legislation has enabled the police to use stop and search powers. And when we look at the statistics that we've gathered on this, we can see that young black men, for example, and those from minority ethnic communities, they are twice as likely to be victims of this legislation, to be given fines. So there are important questions about the defence of liberty. In Australia, the police chiefs, they have used COVID legislation to prevent Black Lives Matters campaigns. And once again, we can see this relationship with politics. At a different level, a softer level, in the UK, we can tell you that many street workers have been asked by the police to intervene in groups of young people who have been gathering on the street. They say to us, please go and stop these young people gathering. Yeah, we prefer your softer approach. And this is interesting because there's an acknowledgement of our power and our relationship with people. But of course, we need to imagine that there is a different side to this story, that we are being incorporated into control measures. These are dilemmas. There are no easy answers to them. We should not say we will not work with the police, but it's about negotiating our relationships with them. So what else do we know from our work recently? We know that there's been an increase of violence in the home, domestic violence and familial violence, yeah, and this has a significant effect on people. We know from colleagues in South Africa and Kenya, where especially in the areas where people live in informal settlements, can you imagine how difficult it is to socially isolate when you live in such concentrated populations? And yet we have images sent to us by activists of people being beaten under the name of coronavirus legislation. In Britain, our biggest problem at the moment is that we've seen an increase in people sleeping on the streets, and street workers report an increase in this. This is ironic because we were successful in campaigning that all people who were sleeping on the streets were given hotel accommodation at the beginning of the pandemic. We knew if they stayed in the hostels, there would be problems with social distancing and the transmission of the disease. So people were put in hotels so they could separate out individually. But this system has now stopped. And we see again an increase in people on the streets. And just recently, we have seen that the Home Secretary, the government have said that they are going to deport those from other countries who were sleeping on the streets. So there's a lot of politics. In Finland, colleagues report the success of the housing first policy. We must get people inside and secure and safe from the virus. There are strange stories also. There is a context of fear that exerts an effect of violence. The story from Sweden about parents who were so frightened about their children that they literally locked them in the house for 5 months. So there's some things about the freedom of movement of young people, the freedom to move, and so on and so on. Even we know that children are prevented from playing outside of their houses. Many parents are keeping children from going to school. Yeah. We need to employ our history as people who think like geographers to understand space and place. And of course, we've got serious issues that affect some populations more than others. And we know which populations they are. These are the deprived areas. The COVID death rate has been twice as much in some areas compared to others. So we can say now with our theory that COVID reveals structural violence. It has amplified, accelerated, and exacerbated existing inequalities. These are not new problems. These are old problems, and they are manifested further in violence. Only yesterday in the UK, we are told that the structural inequalities are the cause of these deaths. So we need to think about economic poverty, food poverty, poor health, access to healthcare. They are all forms of violence. Just a couple more. I'm interested in the fact that the economic crisis that COVID has created has meant that many of our organizations are struggling for finance, for the money to do our work. And this is difficult because many of our sponsors, many of the charitable donations that we receive, they've gone down, they have been eliminated. But some organizations, they are trying to advertise, for charitable support. But it's important to be careful about how we do this. This is one organization, I've taken the name from their advert deliberately. But they are trying to argue that the street is not a safe space and that young people should be brought inside. This is not our ethic as street workers. We are trying to create a space that is positive. Yeah. So we have to be careful that we do not become perpetrators of violence against young people. It's a difficult issue. Young people have been severely affected by the economic crisis. They are 20% more likely to be out of work. The existing inequalities mean that 750,000 young people in Britain have no work, and now there is 750,000 more. So we need to consider these basic issues. 600,000 more young people out of work in this country. Finally, it becomes clear that we need to reflect on our experiences, especially about working in the context of violence for the future and the future of our practice. And colleagues from Wales, they say this: we have to make sure that after the pandemic ends, services are not only put back, but developed. I think we share this understanding. And I'll leave you with a comment from a young person, a young woman from Bristol in the southwest of England. She talks about the need to create communities where there's less loneliness, a greater sense of community, more human interaction. She says, I hope people understand that being able to socialize is so important for everyone. So I hope I've created a context in which the speakers can respond to. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Maria Aldanas, who is the policy officer at FEANTSA, which is based in Brussels, Belgium. Established in 1989, this is the European Federation of National Organizations working with the homeless. The organization brings together services that support homeless people across Europe. It has over 130 member organizations from 30 countries. Maria studied law at the University of Madrid and holds a master's degree in migration and intercultural relationships. And she's been working on the issue of homelessness and housing rights since 2016. She coordinates the Housing Rights Watch Network, which brings together NGOs, academics, lawyers, and others to promote the housing rights of homeless people. And finally, I would say that their work includes strategic litigation and combating the criminalization of those experiencing homelessness. I'm going to invite Maria now to speak to us for a little while. Thank you.
Thank you, Graeme. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Okay, that's great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and inviting FEANTSA to explain a bit of what we've been doing in relation to this specific topic. It's very important for us. It is very relevant for the issue of homelessness. You've saved me explaining what FEANTSA is, but what you didn't say is that our secretariat is in Brussels. So we also play a big role in making sure that the issue of homelessness is in the agenda in the EU. So having said that, the main themes that we've been working on, I've been working on recently, is the criminalization of homelessness, for example. Concretely, during the lockdown, we've been working with our members, so associations and cities, to try to learn from each other on how to do better in accommodating people in street situations, identifying new accommodation, or even adapting the accommodation so that they could self-isolate, and facilitating support to all of these organizations. And of course, we've been also working on the legal aspects of the COVID-19, so how the lockdown enforcement measures were affecting homeless people. So maybe we'll speak a bit more about that later. So what we were calling for is so that homeless people were not further criminalized during lockdowns. And there is overwhelming evidence that there have been fines more or less in all Europe, but it's a much smaller issue that we expected. So during the health crisis, confinement measures took account of the special vulnerability of people in mainly everywhere, but there's a few fines and coercive measures, but we consider it a relatively minor issue according to our members. So I don't know if I am answering to, I don't think I have much more time right now. Maybe we can give the floor to all participants and then we can engage in conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to take the next speaker and the ones after, and then we'll use the questions for some discussion, okay? So it's my pleasure now to introduce Arlyne Fernandez, who is the National Coordinator for the Virlanie Foundation in the Philippines. Welcome to colleagues from the Philippines. The Virlanie Foundation acts as the Filipino platform for the International Network of Social Street Workers. Welcome, Arlyne. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. It's afternoon in the Philippines, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be invited in this discussion. And I am not a national coordinator. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Virlanie Foundation. And our organization exists for the past 28 years working with street children and all disadvantaged children, particularly in the key cities of the Philippines, particularly in Metro Manila. Virlanie has been working with children in the streets and as well as in poor communities. And particularly in this time of pandemic, it was really a turnaround, not expected situation for all of us. But maybe later I can discuss with you on how we are surviving and how we do things to be able to continue our work with the less fortunate. So in behalf of our founder, Mr. Dominic Limay, he is now actually in France and has been in lockdown since March. He left the Philippines to visit his family in the beginning of March, and until now he cannot come back. You know what is the current situation in France now. They have the second wave due to the pandemic. But but I can say that in all these challenges, we can always have the opportunities to to look at it. So maybe later I can share more. So hello to everyone, and it's very nice to see familiar faces. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlyne. Okay, we turn now to Valbona Hystuna, who is the head of the Youth Support Centre for ARSIS, which is an NGO based in Thessaloniki in Greece, where she has worked since 2003. ARSIS aims to protect and integrate young people on the move, child migrants. Valbona develops training sessions on child protection and children's rights for professionals and for young people. She's also a member of the Citizenship Commission in the region of Central Macedonia, which is in northern Greece, and a representative of the National Committee for Human Rights. Also, in addition to these many other activities, Valbona is one of Dynamo International's resource persons. I won't say good morning because I'll probably get it wrong again, but welcome, Valbona.
Hello, everybody. So good afternoon and good morning to everybody. Actually, ARSIS is a Greek NGO that is operated all over Greece, not only Thessaloniki. Myself is based in. I'm based in Thessaloniki and have been working for 17 years for the protection of minors on the move, and especially for victims of trafficking. So, talking about the violence of the authorities and for the government and politicians during all of this period, actually. So there are a lot of things to say, and unfortunately there are negative practices mostly. So Greece is the first gate of welcoming actually people from different countries that are in a war situation or in a extremely poverty situation, or in disrespecting human rights situations and contexts. So having all of these, the huge number of people that are trying to find a safety environment, a safe environment in Europe, Greece is the first door that is doing that. In the era of COVID-19, there were plenty, unfortunately, of cases that the government just pushed off and disrespect of the human rights and of the people, and actually talking about basic needs of those people. So when the government, the Greek government, but even the European government was talking about the campaign, stay home, stay safe. So the refugees and migrants were totally out of the picture. So it was very difficult for Greek civil society, for the Greek society in general, to see that how those people can be included in the whole picture of the government and the whole picture of this politics. Talking about camps, talking about refugee homes, where there are more than 10,000, and talking about Moria, that actually is the most famous camp, refugee camp all over the world nowadays. So there were about 17,000 people for all the period of the lockdown in the total lockdown in Greece, and then after the breaking the lockdown, all the camps, and especially in Moria, continue to be in a lockdown situation. And so everybody can understand that this situation brought the people to be angry. Nobody could know that who is the people in charge, who are the responsible persons for the creation of those situations around Greece, in Moria and around Greece especially. So people that could move or wanted to move in the other parts of Greece, just because to find a solution for their life, to touch their basic needs, actually. They couldn't do that because they were arrested. They had to be fined, actually, by the police, because they cannot keep their social distancing. They could not be at home or be isolated. So a situation actually that is continuing nowadays, because nowadays it's still the same situation. So there are different locally lockdown taking place, and still refugees and migrants are not included in the picture. So even the new camp, the new situation of the Moria camp, of the people that lived for many time for a long time in Moria camp, they are still living in another camp in a similar situation, that cannot be part of the society, that cannot keep of the restrictions, actually, and the measures of safety measures that the governments actually are trying to apply. The society is actually the social solidarity is trying to push the government and to have different movements and good practices in order to keep people safe and to keep people integrated, to keep people with us. So to be part of the society, because they are part of the society, since they are living in the Greek territory, in a European territory, and of course there have to be pushing policies in the European Union governments as well, that will support people for the time ahead. Thank you very much.
That's super, thank you. Some particularly good examples there of the kind of things that I was talking about, trying to make a conceptual connection between human rights and the disrespecting of human rights and basic needs and this concept of violence. Also important questions about how institutional society can create problems of inclusion and to be part. We're also talking about participation, the right to participate, and these kinds of institutional effects, these kind of institutional, structural and violence, it can inhibit that. And perhaps one more thing to say about Valbona's story is about how one set of decisions, it has an effect afterwards. So when there is lockdown, that is disproportionate, it catalyzes anger. We can come back to these things. So it's my great pleasure now to hand over to colleagues from Hong Kong. I think there's more than one of you this morning. I know Carmine is with us, but I think we have colleagues also, Fai Wong, Kathy Young, and Carmine Wong. Are you with us?
Yes, we're here.
Yes. Let's hear your story, please. Welcome.
Thank you. Our outreaching team serves underprivileged young people aged 29 or below, providing them with a wide variety of support service. During our work with young people, we must feel their pain so as we can help them to realize their needs and also their constraints. Moreover, we must adapt a supportive and inclusive and also appreciative attitude to interact with young people, for whom we create windows of opportunities through which we can strive to unearth their strength and connect with the community for personal benefits and also social justice. Since 2019, Hong Kong has gone through some trying times due to political disturbance and also COVID-19 outbreak. Young people are experiencing unprecedented level of pressure, anxiety, and also despair. According to a recent research by University of Hong Kong, 15% of Hong Kong youth are suffering from symptoms of depression, and that rate is 3 to 4 times higher than that of their counterparts in Japan, Korea, and the mainland. Due to the breakdown of communication and trust between young people and helping profession, those needs in service are being increasingly difficult to reach. Moreover, more young people have gone into self-seclusion following the suspension of school, also the suspension of public service and entertainment revenue due to the outbreak since February. To our service, this is a challenging time. In response to this challenging, we try hard to come up with a round measures to ensure our work can fit the current needs of our youth. And these events can help them, but can help us to connect youth people with connect with community, and especially we have tried to have some emotional support for the youth who are suffering from the social unrest social unrest situation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me also tell our audience today that yourself, you are the social work supervisor for Caritas in Hong Kong. And I know we have colleagues from other countries who've got history of working with Caritas with us today. Caritas aims to promote the holistic development of young people through the process of understanding, care, participation, and commitment. And we've heard this in Carmen's testimony. Also to enhance mutual support and social inclusion. Social inclusion is an interesting concept when we think about violence. The kind of decisions and policies that inhibit social inclusion, that inhibit social solidarity, that make it difficult for people to connect. Caritas's Hong Kong youth outreach team mainly serves marginalised and underprivileged young people below the ages of 29, and they work on the street, of course, engaging with service users, and especially they are interested in this connection between young people and services. Probably also I hear from the story this interesting relationship between issues of social justice and the despair that is caused and the depression that is caused. These are the tangible effects of policies and decisions elsewhere. So I thank you for your presentation. Now I'm going to turn to the questions, and to repeat how we will work with these questions. I'm going to ask a question to all our speakers, and if you can indicate if you want to respond, we will take your responses. But please also, to anybody else who's joined our webinar today, if you want to ask a question or make a comment about this question, please put it in the chat, and colleague Francesco and others will ask that question on your behalf, and we can ask our speakers to respond to the points that are made. We can have a discussion and a dialogue. So the first question I have to all of our speakers and to the wider community who joins us today is, how has COVID-19 affected our relationships with the people that we work with? How has COVID-19 affected your relationships with those that you work with? One of our speakers want to contribute a response to that question. Our relationships with those that we work with, what have been the effects of the pandemic? Valbona? Off you go, Valbona.
Yeah.
That's not the first question.
So actually, I'm going to say the same what I mentioned, but actually to highlight it, to be much more detailed. So the relations with the people that during the COVID, so there were so many consequences, let's say, that people survived, or people was obliged, were forced to deal with during the COVID lockdown, and during the whole period till now, through 2020. So in Greece, talking about actually my context, is that even pushbacks were so often, so it was legally let now, because nobody could focus on the refugees and the situation of the people during these times. So there were so many testimonies and stories of people that were pushed back illegally by by Frontex and by Greek police in the borders, just because in the name of saving or protecting or defending the country and the European borders from spreading the virus. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Graeme, do you want to say something?
I'll respond to your statement. It maybe in the form of a question. It seems that you are saying that almost the pandemic, it creates a hierarchy of valuing of people, and the sense that when we talk about the country, politicians, they tend to prioritize those that they think are indigenous to the country, and there is less respect for other people.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes. And also it was of the school exclusion, the education exclusion of all the children living in the camps, but still, even for children of refugees that were living in apartments in the city, they couldn't, it was impossible for all of them to be included in the distance by distance learning that the Greek government applied during the lockdown period. So as organization, as civil society, we tried to cover some gaps, but it was impossible because the number of the children in the country that are totally excluded, it's too high, it's very big, and and nobody could cover the whole needs. And the result was that all those children were totally excluded from the education system. The health issues as well. Health issues, there were so many people that couldn't go even the hospital because of the restrictions. Because if you couldn't fill the online, for example, form that the government applied for those days, you couldn't go out because you could be fined by the Greek police because you break down the lockdown and the restrictions. So all of these testimonies actually are continuously coming and arriving, reaching us all this time. And trying actually, yes, it's the biggest problem, the biggest program actually of accommodation in Greece that is covered by the Greek government. It's finishing, it's the finalizing in 30 November 2020. And actually nobody is is responsible to say that what is going on, what is going to be, what those people are going to be after the end of November. So all of this, the civil society and the activist actually movements are trying to push the government to suggest good practices in order to keep those people protected.
Yeah. Okay. Again, since the interesting reference to testimony there, we can come to that back. We can return to the question of testimony when we talk about media in a moment. But I want to go now to Maria. I think she wants to speak a bit more widely about the homeless context and the issues of violence that we're discussing now. Maria.
Yes. Well, what I wanted to do is like a kind of speak about the context that existed before COVID. I don't think we can speak about COVID and how it affected homeless people and what we can learn from that, or what kind of opportunities we see in that, if we don't speak about generally what is violence in relation to homeless people. Like, and I think that if you ask, I don't know, the general public, for the general public, being homeless means someone who lives in the margin of society, who is more or less invisible. There's a stigma associated to being homeless. And I think that the biggest issue in relation to homelessness and violence is how homeless people that need to live in public spaces are being penalized for the activities carried out in the public spaces. And this is something that has been happening in Europe in the last decades, and it's still there. And this is and this is being seen in the laws, in bylaws, in ordinances, in national laws, in the Hungarian constitution, for example, forbidding altogether sleeping rough, for example. But violence can come from many different actors. It can come from the general population, so associated to rejection and prejudices. It can come from the local authorities, sweeping away, cleaning the city centers for homeless people, especially in very touristic cities. It can come from the police, finding the homeless people that don't have anywhere to sleep or anywhere else sleep or to eat or to simply perform all. I mean, I think you said it before, Graeme, how you penalize people for doing things that are very their needs, they need to do because that's where they live. So there is huge violence against homeless people when we penalize the activities they need to perform in public spaces, for example. And our position is rough sleeping cannot be solved by penalizing or further penalizing homeless people. So it can be solved by providing housing, providing support, establishing other pathways out of homelessness, but not punishing the people that the system have failed. And we can come back to that later and maybe give examples of existing laws that are now enforced in Europe. But I would say that all these penalization measures and criminalization measures on one side, but you also have the hate crime. So I'll explain myself. So the measures that penalize the use of public space affect mainly homeless people. They create an atmosphere in which it is acceptable to target homeless people. So they can generate some power dynamics leading to harassment by police officers, for example. The reality of homeless people remains still invisible and unknown to many, and it makes easier to perpetuate this stigma, the stereotypes, and the prejudice. And sometimes stigmatization is accompanied by other attitudes of intolerance. And these intolerance attitudes, they're the breeding ground for hate crimes.
Yes.
These crimes are the violent manifestation of a socially accepted prejudice. So the framing of violence against homeless people as hate crime is more advanced in countries like the US or in Europe, maybe the UK. But in the EU, it's not always conceptualized as hate crime. So violence against homeless people, like real violence, not the other kind of violence that would mention, it's exists, and it's based on prejudice, and it is a reality.
Again, these are really interesting examples of how violence can be direct and interpersonal, but also it can be remote. It can come from afar because of institutional policy making and decisions, and the manifestations in terms of intolerance can be seen directly. So I think my contribution of John Galtung's ideas, they are very relevant to the kind of things that we are talking about. But I'm interested also in the very positive things that are being talked about in terms of, for example, securing accommodation for homeless people and providing housing, and the campaigning work that we have done and will continue to do these things. And my own example from the UK, when the political decisions were made to house people because of the pandemic, it proved unequivocally that it could be done. Yeah, exactly. Always in the past, people said it cannot be done. It cannot be done. And it proved it could be done. And we can now say, you have demonstrated that it is possible to help people. Yeah. So
absolutely. Absolutely. I think what the health crisis proved is that it was possible to be done, something that remained unsolved for so many years. And I think bottom line of this is that we cannot continue doing business as usual. Like that's probably one of the learnings. So because governments put in place many resources, governments and also NGO sector, but the NGO sector is very strong there. So I don't know, night shelters open round the clock. That happened in Austria, Netherlands, in Barcelona. Winter programs extended, that happened in Belgium, in Denmark, France, Berlin, like almost everywhere. The extension of winter moratorium on evictions, the extension of winter moratorium and also moratorium on electricity disconnection, for example. Additional spaces opened up, and governments and NGOs were very creative in using sports stadiums, convention centers, hotels, hostels, Airbnbs, and also there's a huge, an important part of the measures that were taken that has to be with suspending evictions, because we want to keep homeless people accommodated in this temporary accommodation, but we also want that there's not another influx of homeless people coming in via evictions. So keeping people housed and putting in place the measures that will allow to keep people housed. This is another part of probably of the challenges that are ahead of us, because it's still not unsolved. It is not solved yet.
It's an important contribution also, and once again we are reminded that our work has many different dimensions. Of course, we prioritize our work directly with people, but the things that Maria is talking about, this is political work, and it is an essential element of our practice also. I'm going to ask if perhaps Arlyne or Ming wants to talk from their context about relationships with those that they work with.
Yeah, regarding your question, here in the Philippines, particularly in Metro Manila, which is the most populated places, it was quite challenging, considering that if you notice, working in the street would need face-to-face encounter with people, but with the restrictions, with the lockdown, it was quite difficult for us at the beginning of the pandemic. In fact, it was difficult because the campaign of the government is to take care of the frontliners. But frontliners at the beginning of the pandemic only refers to health workers, but not NGO workers. So it was difficult for us to move from one city to another to go to our places where our people are located, in the streets, in the poor communities. We need to secure so much travel authorities, travel clearance, just to be able to go to our areas. With Virlanie in particular, we work in three structure: in the street base, the community base, and our residential homes. We have 6 residential homes for the moment that house more than 150 children. So what we do at the beginning of the pandemic, because no one can move, but in terms of creativity, because for instance, with the community and the street base, we were able to identify leaders already in the community. So our social workers, our street educators don't need to go directly to the street, but they make use of the social media. I know, for your information, I think the Philippines is one of the social media capital, not just in Asia, but I think in the world. We make use of the social media to communicate. So for us, it was a very good opportunity to connect with our beneficiary through social media. We establish chat group, to check on their conditions, to ask what they need. But bottom line, at the first few weeks of the pandemic, what is very evident is the food security of the people. We work with families who are daily wage earner. So that means if they cannot go out of their house, they have no income for the family. So the relief distribution in our case was right away put in place on the second week of the pandemic. So even if it's very dangerous for our social worker, for our street educators, and even member of the management. Was so difficult to go to the street. We have no choice but to go there and to really risk ourselves so that we can deliver food packs to the families. We have around 500 families in the same area that we have distributed. But I could say that at the beginning of the pandemic, even as we watch the news and we hear sharing from the different NGOs, violence actually started because of the fact that people are hungry. So it was very quick that we need to resolve that issues of food security. So as we go along, we also encounter problems like we have some staff who were already exposed to the virus, and we need to to undergo self quarantine. So less staff was able to work because of the restrictions. So we really have to innovate ourselves, to contact because at the beginning of the pandemic and towards end of May, we have seen that there was lot of hotels, for instance, and food company that are closed, and so they decided to give their excess food. There was really a solidarity among the different groups to really provide food for the people, because as the government announced that they are giving what we call social amelioration fund. It's like a cash incentive to the people. So when people heard about it, they have to line up, even stay overnight in the place where distribution was done. And it was really chaotic, and it was really difficult, apparently, because we heard people saying that some local barangays would make how you call it agreement with the people, that they say, okay, we will include you in the list, but provided with the it's around 120 euros cash incentive that was given to poor people. But if due to corruption, there are a lot of local officials who would tell people, okay, we can include you in the list, but you give percentage to us.
Yeah,
It's
corruption.
it's so it's so really very frustrating. We have heard a lot of people saying we have no choice but to promise that if they give us like 120 euros, the 20 euros will go to this official. So the corruption is really very bad. So in a sense, the first 2 months of the pandemic was really an emergency situation to all of us. But I think what is really good with the communities, I mean with all involved, we were able to reach out to our people. You cannot believe that even if they are very poor, even if they don't eat, they have a cell phone. So the communication is not actually a problem, but it comes to a point, because the pandemic is now on their 7th or 8th months already. It comes to a point that we have to be innovative, in a sense that we need to provide load to the people. You cannot imagine we continue with our family strengthening seminars to poor communities for us to prevent people from doing violence, because as there were studies during this pandemic that the issue of physical abuse increases in such short a time. So with the services that we are providing to the poor communities, we tried our best to really educate the parents, and really find ways to check on their children. But I have to say that what is also sad is the fact that because of the extreme poverty, there is a percentage also of families who there was an increase in the online sexual abuse. When I say that, that the online business of selling children online is really one very alarming issues in our country. But it was really what is very good in our system is that NGOs are one in terms of coordinating with each other. We have put in place a webinar for all the NGO worker, to since they are locked down in their houses. We usually report at work two times a week only. So there are a lot of opportunity to learn about psychosocial issues of children, how parents will be able to take care of. It's really equipping the families on how they will be able to surpass this crisis. So it was really challenging, but what is our school was postponed to several months. We only opened in October. But you can imagine that when we opened in October, a lot of families don't have the gadget because it's online schooling. They can only make use of their cell phone. But some cities in Metro Manila were able to provide gadget to their constituent. Case, we have some partner donate laptops that our children can use. So it was really the solidarity that makes it more, more lighter. But of course, what is also important is how we will be able to maintain this, because the pandemic is really something that we don't expect. Everybody don't expect it, and well, in fact, we also have issues of our overseas contract worker. There is 2.2 overseas Filipino workers who are, since the pandemic, they started coming back home. So this is another group of people who will not have jobs for a certain period of time, and really the poverty become more more difficult, and so that's it. Yeah.
So we see a mixed picture. That the testimony about social media is interesting. We can see that there are very positive aspects to maintain contact with people, innovative ways of working with social media and digital activity. But there's also, on the other side, digital poverty. Yeah.
Yes.
And this potential for these medias to be used for exploitation. The story about relief distribution, again, what comes in front of our eyes is the importance of acknowledging basic needs. There's also an issue of violence in terms of the lack of protection for workers. This is a form of violence when the workers are not supported to be safe. But a positive story about our partnership and our coordination. I'm going to go now to Carl Ming. Carl Ming's going to say something about street work with underprivileged young people, and perhaps her colleagues as well. And then I'm going to invite participants. I think, Francesco, it's correct that we can give the floor to participants to speak if they would like to talk directly. And we'll see what comments come from our very many participants today. So first, I'm going to take a contribution from Carl Ming. Carl Ming, can you?
Yes, we're here.
Thank you.
Yes, as you have said, we'll talk about the work towards the youth, underprivileged youth. As you have mentioned just now, they recently encountered a suspension of class, so they cannot go to school. And then all the entertainment venues and all the sports courts are closed, so they can rarely go out. And also it actually affects our work that we could not go to meet them outside due to the restriction on gathering. Actually, there are around 1,500 people got fined due to the restriction on gathering, and 70% of them are young people. So they can rarely stay outside. They have to stay at home and they have nothing to do. So they encounter family conflicts because they have to communicate with their parents, and then they could not stand with their parents' temper. So they encounter more family conflicts compared to before COVID-19. And then you have also mentioned the youth unemployment is also another issue that we have seen among the youth being marginalized, as they are less educated, and then they have less abilities to compete with other young people in the market. So they have to seek for financial assistance through social workers, which we have supported them a lot during the COVID-19. We actually see some opportunities during the COVID-19. We have also put our communication on social medias, just like what Philippine has done. She has also mentioned. We utilize the social medias to build up reports and then keep our engagement with the young people to ensure the connection between our service and the young people. Also, we have also see this as a chance for us to distribute the antivirus resources, just like face masks, as this is one of the law and regulations that the government has imposed recently. So everyone has to wear a mask, just like how we three are doing. And then it is also a way for us to re-engage our previous the young people we previously knew them before. So we also see this as an opportunity to provide tangible support during the difficult times. And one of another opportunities is during the COVID-19, there are more crises among young people. We also see this as an opportunity to intervene, we can provide immediate counseling service or crisis intervention to maintain our relationship with them.
Thank you very much. Again, let me say how much I value the contributions of our speakers, but I also want to value the contributions of all other participants. So I'm going to ask Francesco now. He's been watching very closely the things that you have said in the chat function, and he's going to relate some of these comments and perhaps provide some further questions to take us to the conclusion of our webinar today. Francesco.
Yes, Graeme, thank you. Indeed, I have some comments and questions from the participants, and I'll start from a couple of comments coming that speaks about the work of social workers and street social workers during this COVID-19 crisis. And as a street social worker myself, I can relate very much to this comment. So they speaks about the creativity and the capacity of adaptations of social workers. For example, I have a comment saying, under COVID-19, I have managed to maintain some face-to-face work, but also support others to be connected via digital spaces, and I've had more one-to-one time with the individual. This has deepened my understanding, my practice, and my approach, and given me more time for relationship and active listening rather than constantly firefighting, as my work is around homelessness, sex work, CSE, and loneliness and isolation. There's another one that goes, we believe that our relationships with young people have been enhanced during the crisis, while most other agencies have been less visible. Our street workers have still been out and about, visiting homes, delivering essential items, and offering support to young people wherever they happen to be. So these are some meaningful comments, I think. And then I have a couple of questions specific for Valbona. So the two questions. The first one goes, how do we protect our solidarity and provide safety for people on the move? Okay. The second one, also for Valbona, is how do you think is the impact of the European refugee politics for those children on the islands? And I'll add, maybe in the lights of how's your understanding of the European Commission new pact on migration and asylum, which will be implemented in next years. And I then have a question for Maria Jose, but maybe I can ask it later.
Let's do that. I think really for Valbona, it's kind of one question, isn't it? You know, it's a question about migration, particularly of minors. How do we support solidarity with those people? And there is within this context a political question. How do we support them practically as people, but how do we advocate for their support at political level? Valbona?
So yeah, thank you for the questions. We are trying with different ways, and I think that there are more others that people that are attending can testify here actually. So protecting the solidarity, the social solidarity to those people, to the vulnerable people in general, not only for the refugees and migrants, it's the most important weapon actually that we have nowadays. So how to do that and how to advocate for those for the rights of the people in need. So there are protests. There are many protests. There are peaceful, actually, protests that were done, implemented all over the country. And the most beautiful and the amazing thing was that in the case of Moria, there were spread all over Europe in sign of social solidarity for the refugees of Moria camp. So there, except protests that are different press conferences or conferences that are implemented in collaboration, or actually inviting government responsible people that have to inform widely the society about the measures of the government, and listening the voice of the civil society and activist movements actually, which is the best interest, and how the government actually can implement much more good examples for the integration of the people. And of course, having projects, having funds, and always requesting and explaining to the European government and to the national government with the capacities and the using funds for the best interest of the people. So these are some of the examples that I can say that the social solidarity is provided, is protected actually, and provides safety for the people of the move. But of course, we have to always to run and to push that the policy of the European Union and the European Union member countries have always to keep in mind the best interest of the communities, in generally the communities, not only the core community of the countries, but in the communities, the whole communities that are in the territory of the European Union. The simple examples are as well that how we keep contact between school and families, and how we could, as I mentioned before, that it was totally impossible for refugee children, for the majority of them actually, not for all of them, but the majority of them, how to keep attending, how to keep going to the didactic hours of the subjects. So we were trying to keep this in relationship, to mediate this relationship, to keep contact with the school, to collect the didactic subjects, to contact with the refugee children, and to have for them lessons. And lessons, because it was totally forbidden to be in a closed space. So we moved all the lessons and all the teaching hours outside in the park. So using all the public spaces and giving them life for the activities, sport activities, music activities, school lessons that were happening in the public spaces. Moving to the next question, I think it was Helmut that had this, my friend Helmut, that has this question, about the impact of the children in the islands. Actually, the impact of the policies, the European and national policies in the children were in totally. So it was for all the children the same. But keeping my attention to the children that, for example, are reaching or arriving in Moria or in Lesbos Island, which is the first one, meeting for the first time these horrible conditions that the Greek government or the European government invite them to leave. So the first thing that they can have is a trauma. So I think that it's very important that to take care the mental health of the children, of the people in general, and especially of the children. Many of them are surviving, are experiencing very hard conditions, very hard emotions, creating for these cases. And of course, having always a restriction within the camp. Children cannot play, cannot have a freedom, they cannot have their voice. So they develop the feeling that nobody is hearing them, nobody is listening about their needs, their basic needs actually. And this makes them that they are totally invisible in this country.
Okay, thank you. Again, a rich set of comments, which I will collect in the final few minutes, but I'm conscious that Francesco has a question for Maria. So over to you, Francesco.
Yes, indeed. I have a question from Maria Jose that is more like starting from a comment. Is it possible to get people off the streets during a pandemic, but the infrastructure of support was not implemented? So the question is, a roof over your head is only one part of the pathway to change your situation. And without an holistic approach, then all you do is push the problem down the road.
Okay. Let me quickly intervene, because there is another question that is related to this, and it comes from Karma, who asks about the work that we could do to support the self-organizations of communities. I think this is very important. You know, the idea that communities have got agency, they have capacity, and our work is to support their own activism, endeavors, and self-support. So perhaps you can also make a reference to that, Maria, as well. Thank you.
About the first question, I think this is among the challenges I was speaking before, like is keeping people housed. So this temporary accommodation has been created so that our fear was that after the lockdown, when all the measures put in place could be, end, so some people would go to the streets. But it's also very true that housing or accommodation or a roof on top of your head is not the only issue. Many of the homeless population that exist in European cities have high needs. And normally, and I'm conscious that I'm speaking to a lot of social workers and outreach workers, they need support. Like, because a lot of the homeless populations have high needs. And when I say high needs, I'm referring to all different types of needs. So support is something that is very relevant to keep people housed. Like, it's not only just giving them a roof over their head and just, okay, that's it, this is what we're done. And I think there's a huge challenge in offering that very much needed support. And because of the self-isolation and the social distance that has been required, this has been much more difficult. So I think one of the efforts that our members, for example, in FEANTSA have tried is how to offer that social support either in more communal services, but also in housing services, shared accommodation or single housing, single occupancy housing. So how to offer that support. So a lot of the exchange that we've had of good practices had to do with this. The idea of what are you doing in your, for example, someone has their
Can people put their mute?
Yeah, I'm hearing someone speaking with a high speaker. Anyway, so for example, let's speak about a housing first service. So people that are put directly from the streets into some kind of accommodation and given the support. So there was a very interesting good practice by one of our members, Ogarsi, who is running a few housing first accommodations. So these were like recommendations for support via telephone to clients, to the homeless people during the hard part of the lockdowns. And it's very interesting because it was translated into 3-4 different languages, and we were quite surprised to find that kind of interesting sharing among our members in different countries in Europe. So of course, support is essential. So when we say, I think in FEANTSA, we are always looking at the structural causes of homelessness, mainly because we want to move away from the individual focus, like is the individual's responsibility of being in that, but we want to focus more on what's structural, and I think housing can be tackled like from a structural perspective would be, but it wouldn't solve on its own because we really need support with it, depending on the needs of the person. About the self-organization of communities, I don't know that much because from the FEANTSA perspective, we have a lot of contact with NGOs, so most of them service providers that are providing the more kind of traditional services. But of course, I, as a person, as an individual, I have realized that in many countries, and for example, in my home country, in Spain, people have everything to do with ensuring that people are receiving their food. Like that's been like a very important, like the queues, people queuing to receive food from associations, very communities, the very own communities, that nothing linked with the government, because the government or the local council was not, for example, in Madrid, it's happening, like there were queues in several districts in the more working class communities that were distributing food, because there's a lot of people that didn't have access to food, and the government wouldn't provide them with that. So I think that's it is very relevant, because in so many ways they are replacing the obligation of public authorities to cover the right to food.
Okay, I'm conscious of the time. I recognize that some participants will need to leave now, so I'm going to make some closing comments. However, we have an extra 15 minutes, so I intend to make some closing comments and then we will continue our discussion. Okay? Just to respect those that need to leave us now. First of all, it's just so obvious for me to say that the quality of the input from our speakers today and the conversation has been wonderful, very high quality. It reflects the commitment of workers. But I want to especially identify the comments that have been made about the creativity of workers, their innovative practice, the capacity to adapt and flexibility, this sense of moving in response to conditions. As somebody said, the ability to work in different ways, depending on who we are working with. And then we have a theme today about the relationship between working with individuals and groups and communities, but also at a structural and political level. There is no choice to be made here. We need activities in all these different areas in order to examine and identify and draw attention to structural causes as well as individual problems. And the word social, it comes up, the necessity for social protection. On Friday, in our comments in the press conference, there will be many references to the importance and value of social protection. But the other social is, of course, social solidarity. And we are demonstrating our capacity to keep contact with people, but also to keep contact with each other, to exchange good practices. So I want to say a great thank you to all the people who have spoken. To repeat, we've got a few more minutes afterwards, but if you need to leave us now, I thank you for your attention today, and I wish you well. And please do, if you can, join us for the press conference on Friday, where the observations and recommendations document, which will be influenced by the things that you have talked about and contributed today. We will make a commitment to make sure that you have the information that's been put in the chat. I think we should be able to get a recording of a video of our conversation today, and the slides and presentations will be available also. So this will act as a resource and some evidence of our work today. So again, if you need to leave us now, thank you very much. But I'm going to go back to Francesco now. I think probably we've got another 10 minutes, and I suspect he will have gathered other comments and other questions that perhaps we can continue to work on. Francesco.
Yes, thanks, Graeme. I'd like to ask the question about how street publics and people on the street auto-organize themselves to find answers to that authorities didn't provide. So this capacity of auto-organizing. I'd like to ask this question to the other speakers, and in particular starting from Arlyne, maybe providing some context from the Philippines.
Yes,
okay.
Francesco.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, in terms of the ability of the street people, particularly the poorest of the poor, able to, you know, to survive and to stand on their own. I think very basic for Filipino, the resiliency. We are a very resilient people, and that you cannot just think of being resilient is something that is really, I think, in our culture, and that even how much difficult it is, even you can imagine that some families during the pandemic eats only once a day. And I really cried in one news on TV, because apparently the little girl, the mother has to barter some plants in exchange for food. And the little girl is telling the mother that because in several days they are just eating porridge, and the child says, maybe now that you can barter with the plants, maybe we can eat some egg and rice, something like that. So it was really very heartwarming. But in terms of the people who are in the poor communities, even if life is difficult, if I can tell you that even before the pandemic, we have a crisis here already. We have the volcanic eruption in the south part of Metro Manila. Even face mask was not anymore available before the pandemic. So you can just imagine how people innovate themselves, because the rule for face mask is a local ordinance already. And, you know, people have no money anymore, and then they will be penalized for not wearing the mask. You can just imagine how difficult it is. But I guess people in the community, they are, they know that they can find ways to ask help from the neighbors. The solidarity become more stronger in this time of pandemic. Everybody has their way of reaching out to people who don't eat, who are hungry. And I think we become also very vigilant. With the social media, there is no way, there is abuse going on, but of course the alarming is that the decrease of reported cases, because of some areas don't have access to social media. And during the pandemic, you cannot just imagine that a very big TV station was shut down by the government. So there is no way people can be reached in terms of their condition in the far-flung areas. And the issue of the anti-terror bill, this is pandemic, and our government decided to push on that particular law that that shut down the freedom of expression of people. They know, our government knows that it's not allowed under the law that they passed during the pandemic, that people are not allowed to gather in big numbers. But it doesn't hindrance us from going back to the street and express ourselves. But there is really a lot of effort to do. And you know that our president is quite popular in terms of how he likes to say things. And so it was really very challenging. And as we Filipinos, we are always put positive things to difficult situations. So I guess we really have to continue to work in solidarity with all our partner NGOs, and whoever has resources to share. And people in the community, they are assured that help will be there, and that they are encouraged to speak up and to reach out in case there is very much difficulty.
Thank you. I would like to ask the same question to Valbona. It's certainly something that we found in the chat from colleagues. This idea, this important strategy, this important practice of supporting self-organization, respecting and supporting the agency of people. Can you make some comments about this? I think this is a really important point because it demonstrates the positivity of the practice. Yeah. And at the beginning, I said it's easy to be negative in terms of violence, but these are really important positive dimensions. Valbona.
Yeah, thank you very much. And actually, I'm happy that I have a good practice to show. Actually, there are many Turkish refugees in Thessaloniki, and that through our connection through street workers and through the youth support center that we are running, we discussed together, and we invited them to use our spaces that for their meetings, for their lessons, for their education. And actually there are many activities that the community of the self-community, actually the self-organized community of Turkish refugees are doing a lot of things in common in the youth support center that ARSIS is running in Thessaloniki. and I'm quite happy to say that. And it's the Nigeria community that is supported in the same way, but they do not organize education workshops or courses actually, but they are organizing their meetings, they're organizing their celebration of their communities in their very important days, national days of Nigeria, using our space. So yes, this is very important. Actually, the supporting the out-organized self-organization actually of different communities in Greece.
Thank you. Forgive me for making a philosophical intervention. It was the American philosopher John Dewey who said that democracy exists in small places. And I think this is a very important thing to remember. The idea that democracy exists between people, it's the product of association, social solidarity. It's not something that easily is seen as only in the parliament and in the government. It exists on the street, in the community. And these examples of support for social and community solidarity are very much part of what Dewey would call democratic practice. I want to finish now with very great thanks to Maria, Arlyne, Valbona, Ming, and our colleagues in Hong Kong. And I want to just quickly remind ourselves of something that Maria said, and others, of course, as well. The things that we have done, the very positive things, and the things that governments have done, they are evidence. They are evidence of the possibility to do things differently. And our work now must be to continue our work directly with people, but also at a political level, to remind people always that there is evidence of the possibility to do things differently, to secure a positive future for all the people that we work with. So I conclude by saying again that we will gather together the material from today so that we have a resource to inform your practice for the future. And I will conclude also by saying again that we have a press conference on Friday where we will try to communicate our messages. And as colleagues who speak French say, it becomes important, rendre visible l'invisible, to make visible the invisible. This is a primary ethic of the work of street workers. It becomes important to talk about the very good things and, of course, the problems that we experience and observe in our practice. So finally, again, thanks to everybody. Thanks to the very, very many participants from all over the world. And I wish you well in your future as people, as citizens, and as social street workers. Thank you very much, and especially to colleagues at Dynamo for the support in the background. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I wish you well. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graeme. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
So now you can say, before leaving, I would just want to add, you can see that there's a survey that you can fill in just after this webinar. So thank you again.
Okay.
Francesco, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Graeme.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your work, and I've got some notes from today, so I will make some testimony also to contribute to our material.
Great. Perfect.
Matilde.
Hi, Matilde.
Okay.
Hi, Matilde.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Je mets fin?